And there's a lot of other clauses too. If this is not a new drug, if prior to 1930 or people have tested it and found it to be safe, then it's not a new drug or a new animal drug. Okay? There's some clauses like that here. And then pesticide, okay, here's an interesting one. Okay? Also the definition of pesticide. Okay, who wants to take this one? If you can explain this to me. Carl, read that. Read this, the whole pesticide section is this whole page, what a pesticide is. But after you read the first paragraph here, you'll realize.
Okay, yeah. Except as provided in Clause B, the term pesticide chemical means any substance that is a pesticide within the meaning of the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, including all active and inert ingredients of such pesticide. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, the term pesticide within such meaning includes ethylene oxide and propylene oxide.
They're used for treating food contact surfaces to sterilize them, okay, in the food industry.
When such substances are applied on food. Do I keep going, the whole thing?
Yeah, keep going, yeah. I mean, you got a whole page there.
In the case of the use with respect to food of a substance described in Clause A, to prevent, destroy, repel, or mitigate microorganisms.
Okay, can you read that one thing, Carl? So here's the definition of a pesticide here, okay, according to the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide of 1947. What is the definition of pesticide?
To prevent, destroy, repel, or mitigate microorganisms.
To prevent, to destroy, to mitigate means to reduce, and what's the other one?
Repel.
Repel, or attract also. So pesticide means to kill, right? The word side means biocide, genocide, side means to kill. Pesticide means things that kills pests, but that's not the true definition. Pesticide need not always kill, according to the definition. If you have a chemical that repels it, like you put calamine lotion repels mosquitoes, okay? There's some things DEET that you put repels pests. So that is a pesticide. It reduces numbers, it sterilizes them, it affects their growth, development, reproduction. So it's all encompassing pesticide definition. So it's a much broader definition than just killing.
All right. Those organisms include bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, algae, and slime.
Okay, so I had a big discussion one time at a feed conference with some feed guys, and there was a guy who adamantly told me that pest is not bacteria, viruses, these are not pests. So, but does it say that? A pest is something that includes all those organisms, right? It includes microorganisms, viruses, bacteria, algae, and insects and others, see? So all those organisms are macro and microorganisms are part of it. So people think that protozoa, these are not, they're totally different. Yeah.
Okay. The following applies for purposes of Clause A. The definition in such clause for the term pesticide chemical does not include the substance if the substance is applied for such use on food, or the substance is included for such use in water that comes in contact with the food, in the preparing, packaging, or holding of the food for commercial purposes. The substance is not excluded under this subclause from such definition if the substance is ethylene oxide or propylene oxide and is applied for such use on food. The substance is not excluded if the substance is applied for such use on a raw agricultural commodity, or the substance is included for such use in water that comes into contact with the commodity, as follows.
So how do you comprehend those statements, though? When you read that, if you imagine, if you have to think of, put some images to the word, what do you think? All they're saying is a pesticide is not something you apply on a food contact surface, okay? Like for example, food contact surface, you apply sanitizers and cleaners, right? If that residue ends up in processed food, they're saying it's not a pesticide chemical. And then they're saying, well, of course, it excludes propylene oxide, ethylene oxide, because you do use them on food contact surfaces and they have tolerances for those residues. And the other thing is, they say, if you're applying, how do you apply pesticide to a raw agricultural commodity on your farm? Do you mix it with water, right? So they're saying that is a pesticide chemical. And if you mix the chemical in the water and you apply it to the commodities, they're saying that's a pesticide chemical. So we'll go to the other one because I just wanted to show to you the complexity of what they say a pesticide chemical is and all that stuff, you know. And again, they also have a definition of a pesticide residue. What is a pesticide residue? Things that you directly apply to raw commodities or to processed commodities is a residue. If I apply a pesticide to my wheat and the residues appear in my flour, the residues in the flour is okay, it's not a residue there. Because when I established maximum safe levels for the pesticide in my raw commodity, I also established safe levels on my processed commodities. So as long as the residue is below that established safe level, we're okay. Okay? Only when it exceeds it, it becomes adulterated. We'll get into that section next. Okay, here's an interesting one. Food additive. So food additive color, you know, they have different definitions of food additive, okay? They first go into color additive, then they go into food additive. So what they're saying with food additive is basically, food additive is not a color additive, okay? A lot of times when you think of color additives only change the color of the food. A food additive has a couple of definitions. I also linked this article about why we add additives. Why do we add additives to food? Number one, to maintain freshness, to increase shelf life, to add nutritive value, right? To texture, flavor, all those kind of things. And to prevent microorganisms and things like that. So, and there's a whole host of approved food additives, okay? And there's a big volume that talks about what those approved ones are. So the difference between color additives and food additives is this. Food additives are materials you add to the food that becomes a component of the food. It becomes part of it, okay? And it changes the food's texture or functionality, taste, okay? Improves freshness, all those things, okay? It is not a color additive. Color additive is not a food additive, understand that. Color additive just changes the physical color, okay? And you have natural colors, then you have artificial colors, certified colors, okay? So color additive, so you understand what a food additive is, right? These are things that are added to the food that change the structure and function of the food, and they become an integral part of the food, they become a component of the food, okay? And again, anything you apply to raw ag commodity that ends up as a residue in the food is not a food additive. That's a pesticide residue, that's totally different. In color additives, there are natural ones, then the synthetic ones, you know, and these are just made of animal or plant origin. And if you look through this, you'll know what they are. There are lakes and dyes which are water soluble, then there are some that are not water soluble. And nobody's got a, people are getting healthier in this class. They're not drinking water. There's no Coke or Mountain Dew. So there's about 9 certified colors that require permission by FDA before you use it, because they have established safe levels for their use. So they are called FD&C Yellow 5, FD&C Yellow 6. You can, when you get a pop can, you can look at some of those things. There's red, there's FD&C Blue, all those things. Especially if you get Gatorade or something, you'll see that. But more color additives added where? Do you know where they're added more? In animal feed, there's some more added in cosmetics. Most colors are added in cosmetics, but only about 9 in food. Safe, there's no definition of safe, right? It's just the injury it causes to humans or animals. And animal feed is, again, any food made for consumption by animals, and then the animals, they're major and minor species, okay? Intended for food for animals in their rations, and they provide nutrition to the animals. Those are called animal feed. So additives, there are 2 types of additives. So when we talk about additives, there are 2 types. One is called a direct additive. Direct additive would be where I physically add, you know, some material to the food that changes its texture, flavor, all those things, right? And there are a whole bunch of them, right? There are emulsifiers you can add. There's, you know, salt. There's all these other materials that you add, anti-caking agents and things like that. Or propionic acid, sorbic acid. They're all part of additives. And then those are directly added. You physically add a known amount into the food. And then there are indirect food additives. Can anybody tell me what is an indirect food additive? It's not added to the food, right? So for example, when you see all the packaging materials have soy-based oils and stuff, right, food grade oils, before they print the cartons, remember? Don't you think when you get your cereal boxes, does it have colors and stuff, right? So a lot of the packaging material, sometimes, let's say there's some moisture and stuff, and some of the packaging material inks, when they seep into your food, that is called an indirect food additive. So anything that you put on the carton and stuff, they're safe, right? And due to some conditions, they becomes component of the food. So things you don't add to the food, but because the way they're handled or the conditions they're placed in, some material becomes component of the food. Then it's called an indirect food additive, and indirect food additives are safe. For example, when you open a can of soup, some of the metal filings will fall in the soup, right? That's safe. So that's an indirect food additive. You don't add to it, but it becomes component of the food in the process of you opening some things. Okay, and these are all safe. Okay, that's an indirect food additive, and they're all. And then there's also additives that are generally recognized as safe. Okay, this is how are they generally recognized as safe? Through use. You use salt all the time, right? You use certain materials in